And so we move on now to the 7th episode of Star Trek Picard Season 3 entitled Dominion. Full spoilers ahead. I've pointed out before that this episode isn't as strong as the previous 6. Season 3 has a very small budget, and for budgetary reasons the show is primarily bottle-based. This episode required a little more money saving than some of the other episodes. As a result, Michael Dorn, Michelle Hurd, and Marina Sirtis are completely absent from this one, and Jonathan Frakes only appears very briefly on the view screen. Considering the high intensity of Episode 6 and the cliffhanger that episode ended on, Episode 7 feels like someone let the air out of the tires by comparison, because the cliffhanger regarding Riker and Troy isn't concluded this week. Very disappointing. This episode focuses mainly on Jack and Vadic, and the mystery behind the changelings and their enhanced shape-shifting abilities. This is ultimately an exposition-heavy episode. Now, to be fair, as disappointed as I was with this episode when I first saw it, I enjoyed it more on second viewing. The episode begins with 7 of 9 on the bridge of the Titan communicating with someone on the view screen. The voice of this person is easy to identify for any Trek fan. It's Captain Tuvok, another Voyager alumni. Having Tim Russ return is very welcome indeed, and his involvement, however brief, is important to the story because the Titan crew are trying to reach out to any trusted colleagues in Starfleet in order to warn them about the changeling threat to Frontier Day. But they ultimately don't know who to trust because anyone could be a changeling. Seven is trying to ascertain Captain Riker's whereabouts, and she's asking Tuvok a series of questions, while Lieutenant Teveen and Shaw discreetly analyze his voice to determine if it's really him. She asks him to help them reach other people they can trust, but he tells her, given the Titan crew's status as fugitives, it will be difficult. The voice analysis is inconclusive. Seven seems pleased with one of Tuvok's answers when she mentions their games of Kalto, and he says that she had beaten him countless times. The Voyager theme plays, and she smiles. All is right with the world. It really is Tuvok, and not a changeling imposter. Great news. Tuvok suggests meeting them in a safe place. Seven says they should meet at Acleon 7, where she once underwent a procedure to stabilize her neural pattern. He responds by saying, of course, any location you desire. Which then Seven realizes he can't actually be the real Tuvok after all. A Vulcan would never want to go to Acleon 7 after the anti-colonoscopy demonstrations.
Dave, you said colonoscopy and not colon R. You're not a real Star Trek fan. Unsubbed.
She also says that her neural patterns were stabilized by her friend Tuvok on Voyager via a mind meld, so this changeling must have gotten that information from the real Tuvok. To be fair, even the real Tuvok wouldn't have been aware if she had to have them stabilized again in the intervening years, but anyway. It's a great scene actually, with a real palpable tension in it. The changelings are trying to track down the Titan's location, so the communication has to be shut down by Geordi. Picard demands that the changeling tell them where Riker is, and the changeling responds by turning into Riker and saying he's as good as dead, just like you. The credits roll. The Titan is hiding in the Chintaka system, which fans of Deep Space Nine will remember. Worf and Raffi are off somewhere trying to track down Riker, and Geordi says that he's running out of places to hide the Titan from Starfleet. Beverly talks about making a weapon to exploit the genetic makeup of the new changelings, but is worried about crossing an ethical line in doing so. Picard talks about how, as an admiral, his involvement in Frontier Day requires genetic confirmation of his identity. Geordi and Beverly speculate that perhaps the changeling plan is to use Picard and Jack's DNA to produce a perfect doppelganger Jean-Luc Picard. For this plan to work, I'm not exactly sure why they need Jack's DNA when Picard was successfully cloned by the Romulans to make Shinzon for Star Trek Nemesis, but the theory is certainly plausible. Data 2.0 in sickbay can offer them more info, but his consciousness is still battling between his Data and Lore personalities. Brent Spiner does a great job switching between the two characters. There's a partition between Data and Lore in the android's brain, battling it out for dominance. The fact that Soong installed a partition between the two suggests he feared that Lore would consume all aspects of Data. Data explains that Soong discovered an anomalous form in Jean-Luc Picard's remains. His previous diagnosis of Irumodic syndrome is in question. Lore interrupts, however, and when Data returns, he pleads to Picard for help, which disturbs both Picard and Geordi. On the Shrike, the talking CGI head is back, aggressively persuading Vadic to bring them Jack Crusher. It also uses the words, "You and your kind will find your own existence meaningless." You and your kind, which suggests that this talking head is of another kind, that it's not actually a changeling superior, but something or someone else entirely. Back on the Titan, Jack is alone with Sydney in the turbolift, and he begins to make small talk / romantic overtures, and then he begins to hear her thoughts. His eyes glow red again, and he hallucinates those tentacle branch things. Jack speaks to Picard. He's feeling guilty for what Riker is going through. He's never been anything but nice to Jack, and Riker has a wife and child. He says he wants to trade himself for Riker. Obviously, Picard refuses. Jack can't accept that people are dying and will die because of him. So Picard begins to hatch a plan to lure Vadic in order to get some answers. So they shut down all non-essential systems to make the Titan appear as if it's adrift after a firefight. Vadic boards the ship with a number of her changeling officers via a shuttlecraft. What happens next is a bit contrived in my view. Jack and Sydney, for some reason, play a cat and mouse game of run and activate internal force fields so that they can trap the changelings in various sections of the ship's corridors. There's a really silly moment where Sydney runs while being chased by a changeling, and he has an easy kill shot for several seconds while she's running away from him. I mean, he's practically like 3 or 4 feet away from her at this point. I mean, he could practically reach out and touch her. I have to say, that was really, really bad. I just gotta look at this again. Oh my god! It just has to pull the trigger! Oh, that's really, really bad. Oh, that was good. I laughed a lot. Oh my god. So the bridge crew are busy activating the force fields while the Shrike crew walk into each one of the traps, with the last one being set in sickbay, and it successfully captures Vadic. The obvious question in all of this is, where the hell are the security personnel of the Titan? I'm aware there is a skeleton crew, but they still have security personnel. And once the changelings were trapped inside the force fields, they could have used those airlock decompression hatches to basically suck the changelings out into space. They only needed Vadic after all. But of course, the script requires the changelings to later take over the ship, so they couldn't be killed just yet. Meantime, Geordi is having issues with the transporter. Lore starts acting up, and he's compromising ship's systems. Crusher and Picard begin demanding answers from the now captive Vadic. She's obviously uncooperative in her quirky, eccentric, and deranged manner. Picard tells her that he knows why she stole his human remains from Daystrom, so that they can use it with Jack's blood to create a near-perfect double of him. They begin to talk about the Dominion War. She blames the Federation for atrocities they committed. Crusher says there wouldn't have been a war if the changelings hadn't initiated it. Vadic believes that the war was necessary because solids were encroaching on them, and solids ruin every world they touch. They talk about the virus that was created by, obviously, Section 31, and how the cure had to be stolen from Starfleet in order to save the changelings. A number of changelings, including Vadic, were captured, and she was specifically experimented on. Experiments that were incredibly invasive and torturous. She was given the ability to perfectly mimic human blood and organs, and hold her form in order to pass every test as a solid. She was held in Daystrom. It was called Project Proteus. Vadic took the form of the woman who conducted the horrific experiments on the changelings after she killed her. Interestingly enough, she uses her changeling abilities to produce a tentacle that impales the woman. But we haven't seen the changelings do this all season. They've been using guns for some reason. Anyway, I have to say, watching this episode the second time around, I actually did feel sorry for Vadic. I mean, I still don't like the overly simplistic motivation of wanting vengeance on the entire Federation because of the actions of one person. I think it's a lazy justification for the character's actions. The plan with these new super changelings was for them to be turned into spies who could infiltrate any species and spread chaos. Vadic was able to transmit these abilities to other changelings willing to join her cause against the Federation. I'm reminded a little bit of the very silly motivations of the character of Nero in Star Trek 2009, where the planet Romulus was destroyed in the 24th century by a supernova, which is an act of nature basically, Ambassador Spock tried to stop it, but he failed, and Nero was sent back through time, and rather than going straight to the Romulan homeworld and warning them of this future event, instead, he seeks revenge, for some reason, against Spock, and destroys Vulcan in the past. What? This is so incredibly stupid. There was absolutely zero thought put into the writing there. That is impressively bad. Now, Vadic's motivations aren't that bad, but she's still ultimately taking out her anger and vengeance on the wrong target, the entire Federation, for the actions of a small minority of people operating in Starfleet's most secretive, off-the-books and unethical operations, specifically Daystrom and this female scientist. Vadic has no personal grievance with Jack Crusher. She should have no personal grievance with Picard or the Titan crew either. She already killed the woman who tortured her. Shinzon's motivations in Star Trek Nemesis were also very weak. He was dying and needed a full blood transfusion from Picard so that he could survive, but he had absolutely zero reason to want to destroy Earth. There's a serious lack of nuance here. It's terrible what happened to Vadic and the other changelings, but this just feels like supervillain is doing villainous bad guy stuff because reasons of insanity, which is a bit unimaginative in my view. Also, Vadic, captured in a force field, seems far more lucid and together than the Vadic we saw in the previous episode where she says to Riker, "Hi," in this creepy childlike way, or when she's giggling at the end of the second episode after the Titan bombards the Shrike with torpedoes, or when she first introduces herself on the view screen and says good afternoon in this oddball manner. The character seems to be kind of all over the place in terms of writing and characterization, running the gamut from kind of satanic to over-the-top cliched arch-villain to kind of goofy and psycho-crazy. I just don't understand the reasons for this. I find her unsettling at times, sure, but I don't really find her threatening. Amanda Plummer does a good job with what she's given, and she's clearly relishing the role with her performance. She throws herself into it with conviction, and that's commendable. But I just don't know whether it's the writing of villains in a post-Joker world where we're supposed to accept that they're the bad guys because they've been driven a bit mad as opposed to being an antagonist, which is different. A villain is just doing bad guy stuff because the plot requires an opposition to the hero, but an antagonist is not necessarily a bad person. They're not necessarily evil. They're simply the thing or person that creates the conflict for the protagonist to deal with, and they may even be doing so for what they believe to be good, righteous, even benevolent and virtuous reasons. The antagonist is the hero of their own story. Take, for example, an antagonist like Khan. Yes, he was driven mad with the desire for revenge, but at least you could tell he had a sense of self-awareness. He was trying his best to maintain his self-control and his composure so that his immense intellect could shine through. Khan was charismatic, passionate, and very much in control of himself. I don't think I can say the same for Vadic. She just sort of comes across as a generic arch-villain. I'm just really glad she isn't the primary villain this season. Anyway, let's move on. Jack's abilities are becoming more sophisticated. He can now take over people's bodies, apparently, or at least he can get into their heads. It'll all become clear later in the season, but there's a scene that really didn't work for me, where he sort of remote controls or enables Sydney to mirror his fight moves while she's fighting a changeling. Again, why the changelings who can take any form would want to engage in hand-to-hand combat is beyond me. They can literally just make swords out of their arms or any other part of their body. It just doesn't make sense. This scene just looked a bit silly in how it was put together. Lore creates some chaos by lowering the internal force fields so that the changelings, including Vadic, can escape. So basically, Vadic and her changelings then go on to take over the ship, with relative ease, it has to be said. And to be fair, this was a major grievance I had with Voyager also, because that ship was taken over quite a few times during the show. I have to ask, where are the security protocols on Federation ships to prevent this kind of thing from happening? A Starfleet ship's security should be impenetrable. It should be next to impossible to take it over. They have the home field advantage. I mean, and instead the changelings just walk in and take over. Also, Shaw doesn't get much to do in this episode either, other than getting beaten up at the end. So when Vadic takes the ship, she sits in the captain's chair, and over the comm she tells Jack it's time he knows who he truly is. the episode ends. Like I said in my episode 6 review, episodes 7 and 8 are best watched together because this one is a bit of a non-event by itself. Still, 1 weak episode out of 7 isn't bad. But I can't help but wondering if perhaps there wasn't enough story for 10 full episodes and there was a little bit of padding needed. I think there was an opportunity here to do a standalone episode, just to give us a little bit of a break from the Mystery Box story arc for a week. Fundamentally, Dominion doesn't sufficiently further the plot to any significant degree. It just feels like the clock is kind of being run down till the events of Frontier Day. So episodes like this one feel like a gap is being bridged to the series finale. Now, as is common and frustrating with Mystery Box storytelling, the truth about Jack and the answers to what's going on with him, as well as other mysteries, are being deliberately held back, with information being basically staggered across the episodes. But there's simply not enough story for all 10 episodes, so the narrative is being stretched a little bit too thin at this point. If there was any episode that you could afford to miss this season, episode 7, Dominion, is definitely that episode. You can probably catch up with everything you need to know from episode 7 in the previously at the beginning of episode 8. So stay tuned for my episode 8 review next week. Thank you very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit that like button and share this video, comment below and let me know what you guys think. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.